All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Good morning, everyone, and welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, October 27th, 2021 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We welcome the public to in-person participation. In addition, remote teleconferencing participation is available to board members and the public pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953E due to the COVID-19 State of Emergency Proclamation and recommendations for social distancing. Public comment. There will be multiple opportunities throughout the meeting for public comment. After I open an item up for public comment, those joining us by webinar can signal they wish to speak by clicking the raise hand button on the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can press *9. Pctpa staff will call out individuals one by one who've indicated that they wish to speak. For those joining us in person, you're welcome to come to the podium. We ask that anyone making a public comment state their name and city of residence. You'll then have a maximum of 3 minutes to speak, and we will notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you experience technical difficulties and are unable to provide public comment during the meeting, please email your comments to Sylvie Sable, our clerk, at ssabol@pctpa.net. Board action. Because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or a second for the record. Once an item has been moved and seconded, I'll request the clerk call the roll to vote. Thank you. And Mr. Holmes, would you be so good as to lead us in the flags over there?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Jim. All right. We move on to roll call. Sylvie?
Amara,
Present.
Broadway,
Here.
Burris,
Here.
Clark Kretz, Holmes, Howdeshelt, Joyner,
Here.
Jones,
Here.
Wilkins.
Here.
Got a quorum.
All right. Approval of the minutes for September 22nd, 2021. Anyone wish to alter or? All right.
I'd move approval of the minutes.
I will second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie?
Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes, Howdeshelt, Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Agenda review. Any requests to alter the agenda?
Staff has no recommended changes to the agenda today.
All right. Anyone from the board? No. Seeing none, we'll move forward. Public comment. This is an opportunity for anyone wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda to do so. You can either approach the podium if you're in the audience, or raise your hand on social media, or press *9 on your phone.
One person.
Okay.
Raise hand. Okay, person ending in 7296, you are free to speak. You need to unmute.
Well, thank you, and good morning, Commissioners. Mike Garabedian. I just wanted to point out that I know the voice of the chair and who the chair is, but the chair did not introduce himself at the beginning, so I can't get Zoom access for some reason, and people that don't know the voices might not know who's speaking. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mike. My name is Paul Joyner. I'm the current chair of Pctpa, as the plaque in front of me should, in theory, delineate. All right. No more public comment?
No.
And we'll go ahead and move on to the consent calendar for the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. Does any member of the board wish to pull an item off of consent?
Mr. Holmes doesn't have any objection.
Okay. No board members out there. Any members of the public wish to have the board pull an item? Lee?
Lee Bash, I'd like to pull item 3. I got a question or concern.
All right, thank you.
I
Seeing,
move the balance of the consent calendar.
thank you.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie?
Okay, Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes. Yes. Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Oh, there it is. Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 3, maybe, Mike, you could do a very quick staff report, and then we'll get Lee's question.
Sure, or Aaron, do you want to, this is on the reprogramming of the bike goers? Oh, okay.
Rick, did we want to take the question first, and maybe that'll shape
Yeah, that
Sure.
might be.
Lee?
I was just wondering if the money that's coming from the Freeway Service Patrol would be reduce the services in current year or future years.
Okay, good.
So what this item is doing is reprogramming some funds, CMAQ funds on the Freeway Service Patrol to the Highway 49 sidewalk project. And this really is just a cash flow change. We are pulling funds from the 2024 year of Freeway Service Patrol to fund the upcoming construction. And our intent is to replace those funds with the next round of CMAQ out in the 2024 year. It's just a cash flow issue in terms of funding the project.
Got it. Does that answer your question, Lee?
Yes, thank you.
Yes, so, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, so any change in the level of service that's provided would come to this body in order to review, should there, based on, this is a simple movement of funds, but if that were to impact it, that would be brought to this body.
Absolutely.
Okay. As you know, I'm very supportive of this program and want to ensure that we continue to provide it. So,
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Lee.
That sounded like a motion.
And that'll be a second.
Okay.
All right. Sylvie, please.
Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes. Howdeshelt.
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We move on to item G. I do note that we've got 2 public hearings, both scheduled for 9 a.m. It's my understanding we can't do any earlier than that, but we can do later than that, so we'll try to move through the first as quickly as we can and get to the second. Item G, City of Lincoln General Plan 2050 Consistency Determination. Mr. Milko.
Good morning, members of the commission. David Melko here. So we're asking you to conduct a public hearing, and then at the conclusion of the public hearing, adopt the resolution finding that the Lincoln General Plan is consistent, subject to 2 conditions. There is a lengthy staff report, and we have a PowerPoint that summarizes the staff report. So with that, excuse me, I'm going to have to scroll through a variety of things that you as a board have already done. So, as the commission, your role is to adopt and maintain an airport land use compatibility plan. You adopted a plan, an update in September, which included updated plans for Auburn and Lincoln. And your second important role is to review changes to plans, including general plans, specific plans, zoning ordinances, building regulations near our airports. So under state law, jurisdictions are required to amend their general plans within 180 days of the adoption of the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, or the jurisdiction can override the ALUC action within that 180 days, or the jurisdiction can refer all projects to the ALUC until the general plan consistency is determined. That's been the norm, where all the jurisdictions have been submitting their projects, at least Auburn and Placer County. Lincoln general plans, as noted in the staff report, have undergone several consistency review and determinations. So once the general plan is consistent, the ALUC's authority is limited with respect to reviews. Our reviews are limited to what I characterize as mandatory reviews under the State Public Utilities Commission, and the general plan amendments, specific plan amendments, zoning amendments, building regulations. Those still come before this body. But conditional use permits, tentative maps, those types of entitlements stay within the purview of the local body and are reviewed by staff. So in regards to the consistency determination, once again characterized under state law, you have three options. You can find the general plan consistent, you can find the general plan consistent subject to conditions, or you can find it inconsistent based upon specific conflicts. So the city dutifully submitted a request for their general plan to be determined consistent under the new airport land use compatibility plan that was adopted here in September. There are 4 ways for a general plan to be consistent. You can incorporate policies into the general plan with respect to aviation and airport land use compatibility. You can adopt the general plan airport element. You can adopt the airport land use compatibility plan as a standalone document, or you can adopt an overlay zoning ordinance or combining district. That's actually something that Placer County has done. And Lincoln's approach currently is to incorporate airport land use compatibility policies into the general plan. So we are guided by Caltrans Airport Land Use Handbook. That's what's required under state law to use that handbook in terms of consistency reviews, and there are 2 tests to determine consistency. The first test is no direct conflicts can exist between the compatibility plan and the general plan, and the second is a delineation of a mechanism or process that allows for future land use development to ensure that it won't conflict with the airport land use compatibility plan. So we go to test number 1, no direct conflicts. So the general plan for the City of Lincoln addresses airport land use compatibility policies. Their land use element has specific policies with respect to airport land use compatibility. So in that regard, there are no direct conflicts between their plan and the current airport land use compatibility plan. I will note that in the past, in 2008 and 2014, we underwent similar public hearings on the Lincoln General Plan, and then since 2014, we have done a number of consistency reviews on specific plans that have amended the city's general plan, as well as the zoning ordinance, the airport layout plan, and building regulations for the City of Lincoln. So all of those are required to be consistent with the general plan, and so we have, in my opinion, thoroughly vetted the City of Lincoln's general plan with respect to consistency. That said,
And that general plan was originally approved in 2008, so
Right.
that date was the beginning of this particular general plan.
Correct. That said, there are 2 conditions to bring this general plan into compliance, consistency with the ALUCP. And I have talked to Steve Prosser at the city, and he's agreeable to that, and will bring a general plan amendment forward to the city council probably next year, sometime next year. And so condition number 1 is to reflect the new wildlife hazard critical zone map on their general plan maps. That's an important safety feature. And then we're requesting that compatibility zone A, the compatibility zones are shown on the general plan land use diagram, and compatibility zone A, which is south of the airport across Nicholas Road, needs to be updated because that was updated in the city's airport layout plan. And so we need to reflect that on the land use map so that property owners know that they are subject to conditions within that compatibility zone. So for reference here, the wildlife hazard critical zone is the, well, I guess depending upon how you characterize the color, it's sort of an aqua blue color. So it's that circle there that will need to be reflected on maps within the general plan. And that's approximately about 10,000 feet, and that's an area where there are policies that govern with respect to any sort of development that would create habitat that might conflict with aviation operations. And it-
David, just for clarification, that's the inner ring there?
yeah, it's the inner
Yeah.
aqua ring.
Second.
It's called Wildlife Hazard Critical Zone.
But it's that inner ring. of
That's it,
the-
inner ring, yeah. And it's approximately 10,000 feet, slightly less. And then the second update is to update compatibility zone A south of the airport runway that goes across Nicholas Road, and that's to reflect the runway protection zone that was updated in the airport layout plan for the city's airport. So, moving on to test number 2, which is a delineation of a mechanism. So, the consistency between the general plan and the airport land use compatibility plan is established by the land use element. There are land use policies that reflect airport land use compatibility. The general plan is adopted by the city council. So by adopting the general plan, the council establishes policy that all development must be consistent with the airport land use compatibility plan, because that's reflected in the land use element. And of course, government code requires that the zoning ordinance be consistent with the general plan. And so that's a mechanism that assures compliance with respect to the land use policies reflected in the general plan that support airport land use compatibility. And thirdly, all development, or at least private development within the city of Lincoln, is subject to some sort of planning review. The city has been quite diligent in referring all mandatory reviews to us, and so their review procedures and how they review projects with respect to airport land use compatibility plan are adequate, and they ensure that the airport land use compatibility plan will be enforced on new development. So our recommendation is, as I outlined in the beginning, is to find the General Plan 2050, subject to 2 conditions outlined, and those are, we're finding it consistent because there are no direct conflicts between the General Plan and the Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan, and that there's a mechanism in place ensuring a future development within the airport influence area will not conflict with the compatibility plan. And those 2 conditions are to reflect the wildlife critical hazard zone on the general plan maps. That's that aqua blue circle. And to expand the compatibility zone A on the city's land use diagram. And with that, I recommend that you conduct a public hearing, and at the conclusion of that, make a consistency determination.
All right. Thank you. Any questions from the board before I go to public hearing?
No questions.
No questions, and I don't see any from our board members in cyberspace either. So I will go ahead and open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify on this matter, please approach the podium, or if you're online, raise your hand or press *9.
Steve Prosser? Steve.
Hi. Good morning, Chair Joyner and members of the Commission. Steve Prosser, City of Lincoln Community Development Director. I wanted to provide comments. The city is supportive of staff's recommendation and thanks the Commission for your time and consideration regarding this matter. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Going once, going twice. Okay, go ahead and close the public hearing. Bring it back up here for a motion.
Mr. Chairman, first, before I make a motion, I'd like to thank Solvi for providing the PowerPoint in advance. It helps my eyes, and I'd make a motion to approve the action before us.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie, roll call, please.
Amara?
Yes.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Holmes? Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We move on to item H, 2021 on-met transit needs process and schedule. Mr. Hoyt.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Board of Directors. I believe we've all seen this presentation in the past, so I'm going to go through it. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer those at the end. But as a regional transportation planning agency, one of our core responsibilities is administering the Transportation Development Act. The Transportation Development Act created 2 fund sources for transportation. The first of those is a state transit assistance fund. The second is a local transportation fund. The state transit assistance fund is derived from the sale of diesel fuel, and the local transportation fund is derived from quarter cent of existing sales tax. So these were both enacted back in 1971. So these funds come back to the county of origin, and then Pctpa within Placer County, within the Pctpa planning portion of Placer County, not the Tahoe Basin area. We reallocate those monies to the jurisdictions based on population. Now, the local transportation funds are intended for transit, but can be used for any other transportation-related purpose. Widening streets and roads, paving, pedestrian bicycle facilities, rail, passenger rail, etc. And so this slide shows that over the course of time, the LTF funds within Placer County that are subject to the Transportation Development Act and the Unmet Transit Needs process have not always gone directly to transit. But through this process, if there are no comments that come through that are deemed reasonable to meet, these LTF funds can be used for other purposes. So this is just a chart showing within the last years how much funding from each of the jurisdictions have been devoted towards transit. But at the same point in time, even though those shares of LTF revenue towards transit have gone down, transit service has maintained constant, and actually you can see back in 2016 there was a bump from the prior years in terms of how much service was being provided. This chart summarizes the annual miles of transit service in Placer County. I would note, though, there was a dip within 2020, and that was because of the start of COVID and kind of pulling back on transit services and no longer running the commute services down to downtown Sacramento. So that did have an effect on actual services being provided. So because these funds are used for other purposes, we are required to annually go through this process. It is really more of a public outreach process where our agency reaches out to the cities, the county residents to try to understand how transit is working for them, whether or not they can get to go to a destination if they wanted to use transit to do so. The definition that was adopted by the board back in 2014 is included in your packet that identifies how an unmet transit need is defined and what tests are required to determine that it is reasonable to meet. So first we look at whether or not a request can be met by the existing transit services that are out there today, and whether or not it is required to provide consistency with American with the Disabilities Act. We then go through a series of checks to make sure that it would meet fare box requirements that each of the transit operators are required to maintain, that it does not exceed the amount of LTF that they would receive on an annual basis, that there is community support, and that it's included in a short-range transit plan or a regional transportation plan. So those are really how we determine whether or not the comments we receive are an unmet transit need. Over the years, there have been a number of recommendations that have occurred, although they were not an official unmet transit need that is reasonable to meet. So back in 2015, we had a bus pass subsidy program. We've also modified various services throughout the county, but most recently, in 2019, there was a dial ride improvement that was made that was an official transit need, it was an official, if I can slow down here, official unmet transit need, where we improved the connection for ADA riders between the cities of Lincoln and Rockland, where prior to this instance, they would actually have to wait and be picked up by another bus to be transferred at basically at the city line. Now, from a programmatic standpoint, there are some other things that we are working on that came out of prior unmet transit needs reports. One is that we are working on reinventing transit. Our agency is working with the city operators to look at a possible microtransit RFP. And we are also looking at this time revising our definition of unmet transit needs. So you'll see in February, possible revisions. Our intent is to make our definition to unmet transit needs a little bit more streamlined, a little bit more easy to understand. I think that's one of the biggest challenges we receive is how do we determine what an unmet transit need is? And it all goes back to our definitions. We're hoping to streamline that and make it a little more clear. So our process began back on September 1st, where we kicked off an online survey. That survey was distributed out through various channels, all virtually. Today is our public hearing. We will wrap up this process in February. And so for kind of the individual steps on our process here, we sent out over 1,100 emails through Constant Contact to gain input and to help distribute this information about the unmet transit needs process in the survey. We've also reached out to each of the PIOs, the supervisor district aides, to share this information in local newsletters and e-blasts. We've also had a Gold Country Media article that was ran in all the different publications that occurred the second week of October. So that gained some traction there. And then we sent out a final email yesterday regarding the closing of the online survey, which will wrap up on the 31st. So today does mark our public hearing, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the online survey will be open again till October 31st. If someone doesn't have email or internet access, they are welcome to give me a call directly. Phone number is here on the screen. They can email me. I have received two emails with comments, or they can always mail something to our office directly. When we ask about the comments, it's really best that we get more information, especially if if the public is referring to a comment of where they do not have transit service. It's important to understand where do these individuals live or where are they trying to get to. If it's more about a kind of a time of day issue they're seeing with transit, it's helpful to understand what bus route they're riding, what time they're trying to get to their destination, because then we can kind of look at that information to try to see if there's any other opportunities. So next steps after our public hearing opens, we will continue to take comments during the months of November and December. We will be evaluating each of the comments that come in. As of yesterday, we had 146 comments that we've received through Constant Contact and through email. That is down a little bit slightly from prior years. It has been a downward trend for the last two cycles. And then we will go ahead and produce a report that will be reviewed by jurisdiction staff and or Social Services Transportation Advisory Committee in January. And then we'll be bringing the report and recommendations back to the board in February. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions that the board may have. And then I'll ask the chair to go ahead and open up the comment period. And a reminder for anyone in the public participating online or in person that there is a 3-minute limit on your public comment. So with that, I'll wrap up my item.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
I have none.
And I see no hands raised, so we'll go ahead and open up the public hearing. Anyone wishing to testify on this item? Mr. Basham.
Lee Ashton, Sheridan Mac. We have no public transportation in Sheridan. And some of our residents see the Yuba Sutter bus that goes to Wheeling. It only goes once a week. It's a commuter run, and they only carry 1 or 2 people. And they wonder how Yuba Sutter could do it, and Placer County Transit can't do it for Sheridan.
All right. Thank you, Lee. Anyone else? No one on the phones, no one in cyberspace? That was easy. Go ahead and close the public comment. I don't believe we take an action on this today. We just...
Nope, just open and close the public comment period.
All right. So we've completed that item then. We move on to item I, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency, fiscal year 2021-22 budget amendment. Mr. Melko, that's also you.
Correct. Turn on the microphone. This is my first time working on the CTSA budget in 3 years, so I guess it's good to be back. So I get to do the budget amendment, and I took the table that is attached to the staff report and I kind of broke it up and summarized it, tried to make it a little bit simpler here in terms of viewing for the public as well as for the board. So the first table here is operating revenue. And so the board adopted a budget in June, and since June, the revenues for LTF and state transit assistance and carryover have been finalized, and those revenues have come in larger than what the assumptions were for the LTF and STA. Those assumptions were based on preliminary apportionments back in February, and so since then, this board has adopted final apportionments for the LTF and STA. And the carryover budget also reflects increased carryover based upon carryover that was within the overall local transportation fund adopted by this board. So there's a benefit to the CTSA. So with that, there's an increase of almost $630,000 to the CTSA operating revenue budget. So what would we propose to do with the increased revenue? So we have several recommendations for the board consideration. So this table is an abbreviated table of the expenditure program, because when you look at the expenditure program, the top level items on that table are all part of Pctpa administration, and there is no changes proposed as part of Pctpa administration. So to make the table simpler, I just have subtotal. So the two programs that we're recommending to use these one-time fund increases are short-range transit plans. Currently, there's a budget for $100,000 for the next short-range plan cycle, because Mike has advocated quite forcefully over the past year or so that we need to reinvent transit, and considering transit ridership prior to the pandemic was on the downswing, and the pandemic basically really hit transit hard in terms of ridership. It's probably a good opportunity at this point in time to take a hard look at transit services, what we want to do, how we provide it. And so with that, there'll be a need for consultant services over and beyond the initial $100,000 placeholder in the June budget. So we're recommending $400,000. Just a reminder that we have 4 transit systems that we are preparing short-range plans for. So there's Auburn, Placer County Transit, and Roseville Transit, as well as the CTSA. So all of those short-range plans will need to be updated in 2025, and that work will probably start sometime in 2022 with respect to looking forward. So we're recommending a $300,000 increase to the budget with respect to the short-range plans. And then with respect to the South Plaza Transit Project, when we applied for the grant for the Solution for Congested Corridor program, if you recall, the CTC awarded that large grant back in December of 2020, and projects that benefit are the South Plaza Transit Project, which is an electric bus project, as well as Interstate I-80 aux lanes project, and several other projects. Roseville had some projects, Sac County had projects, Sac RT, and Citrus Heights. So there was a funding commitment from the CTSA for $75,000 to help fund pre-development activities, design activities, because the project is proposed as a zero-emission bus service. There will be a need for electric vehicle charging stations. Roseville will be taking the lead on implementing that project, and they've requested that funding be for those project development activities be identified, and the CTSA has the commitment, and so we've included that here in the amended budget. And lastly, there is, because the operating reserve works on a formula, there is an increase because of the increase in operating revenue. So with that, operating expenditures will increase approximately $430,000. So to kind of wrap up everything that I've said, so the operating revenue have seen substantial increases in LTF, the STA, and the carryover, and they allow us to fund one-time costs that weren't previously possible, and the operating expenditures will be set aside for the next short-range plan update, one-time funding commitment for the South Placer project, and of course the formula increase in the operating reserve. And with that, we'll carry over approximately $382,000 into the next fiscal year, which also can be used to mitigate any unforeseen costs that come up between now and then. And I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right. Good presentation, very straightforward. Any questions from the board?
I have none.
All right. We've got a raised hand somewhere?
We do.
Is this a member of the public?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
Yes,
so,
I'm
so I will now open it up to public comment.
I'm so
That's all right.
sorry. Mr. Garabedian, you're allowed to speak.
Good morning again. This is Mike Karabedian. I think it's time for me to speak on this item. Is that correct?
Correct. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you. The focus that's needed is on the entire South County area. There's no question that the development that's going on now and proposed is going to create a transportation nightmare in the future. And it's time to not piecemeal this, but to recognize the entirety of the future transportation problem here, including the possible roles of transit in it. This does not really address that. The individual EIRs on the different projects don't address that. Transportation engineering expertise confirms that this is a serious problem that's not being addressed, and that people are misled to think that the proposed highway projects are going to relieve congestion. So the need here is for a broad scale, whether this is part of that or contributes to that or not, for the entire South County region to look at its future for transportation that right now is in a terrible potential spot. So very concerned that this does not go anywhere near far enough. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Mike. The item before us is a simple budget amendment. It wasn't an overall plan. Mr. Melko, you wanted to speak on that?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that, we're requesting of the board a substantial increase in the amount of funding that we reserved for short-range transit plans. And, those plans look out, 4 to 7 years. And so when we engage in that opportunity, and we embark upon that, we will be looking at development projects that are approved and pending, and all of that will be taken into account when we design service recommendations for South Placer. And it covers South Placer because the transit systems cover South Placer. So I think we will be able to address that.
Good. Any additional public comment? Seeing none, we'll bring it back up here. Chair is ready for a motion. I have a motion, Mr. Holmes, second.
Second.
Good. Sully?
Amara,
That's me.
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We move on to item J, Memorandum of Understanding, Regional Transportation Funding, Financing Plan for South Placer, South Sutter Region, and an implementation plan for Rego Road Baseline Road improvements. Mr. Melko.
Okay, so changing hats from transit now to roads. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for this. We just have this slide that introduces the item. There's a lot of text associated with the staff report, so I'll cut to the chase. So we're asking the board to adopt a resolution to authorize the executive director to execute a multi-agency memorandum of understanding between us and participating agencies, which are characterized in the MOU as Sutter County, Placer County, and the city of Roseville. And that will allow us to develop the analysis for a regional transportation funding and financing plan for South Sutter and South Placer County, as well as develop an implementation plan for Riego and Baseline Road improvements. I will note that I believe the Roseville City Council approved this on October 20th, and I believe this was approved by the Placer County Board yesterday and will be approved by the Sutter Board on November 9th. And then with that, we will then move forward. This MOU basically recognizes, it should be recognized by the board, that PCTPA will be taking the lead with respect to these activities, which will eventually lead to, at least for Riego Baseline Road, the next phase will be the PA and ED phase, the project development phase for that particular road. And so with that, this MOU carries an obligation in terms of cost, and it's estimated to cost about $60,000, and the jurisdictions have agreed to share the costs equally, so each jurisdiction will fund $20,000. And the MOU identifies 3 tasks, and we will be proceeding with task 1, and when we complete task 1, we will then, with the project development team, identify what we need to do for task 2 and 3, and that will probably require either an amendment to this MOU or subsequent MOUs, to execute those work activities. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Questions?
And I see none out there either. I'll go ahead and open it up to the public. Anyone wishing to comment on this item? We do have one.
Mr. Garabedian, you're allowed to talk. Mr. Garabedian, you may speak.
Mike, are you there?
Thank you. I think I'm unmuted now. The Placer County Tomorrow is opposed to this as basically oriented towards facilitating more development in that area, which already has the proposed Placer Parkway to end at the Sutter Point area in 99. This is really opening a second opening for open space and development, and it's far too narrow. We need a wider look at the whole area. So this is really, it demonstrates a focus on that particular area and trying to address the already unplanned and transportation needs for this area. I have seen the study that was done. It reflects this. So this item, we believe, should not be adopted. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Anyone else? Seeing none. Back up to the board. Chair is open for a motion.
Yeah, but, Mr. Chair, before I make a motion, I would like to just note that I've received several questions about Baseline and Riego, wondering when improvements will be happening there. So, not only is the city of Roseville supportive, but yeah, so are our commuters who commute to other parts of the region.
All right, I have a motion from Mr. Holmes. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Sylvie?
Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We move on to item K, project agreements, certifications, permits, CEQA notices, documents, and amendments for PCTPA projects. Mr. Melko. We're working you out hard today.
You are, yeah. Well, as you can see, I'm multimodal. Airplanes, transit, and now roads. So, okay, on this one here, so we're asking, there's no PowerPoint, it's just the introductory slide. So we're asking this board to adopt Resolution 2939 to authorize the executive director to execute project-specific agreements, certifications, permits, CEQA notices, and other documents associated with projects for 4 projects: Interstate 80, Aux Lanes, Highway 49 gap closure, Highway 65 widening, and Riego Baseline Road. The assumption is that, with the previous MOU, that we will be doing some pre-development work associated with Riego Baseline Road, and so in that regard, that's why we have included Riego Baseline Road as part of this resolution. We do have a programmatic resolution that provides the executive director to enter into various funding type of agreements and cooperative agreements. However, Caltrans, and I think it's really coming from FHWA, want project-specific resolutions. And so we could come back to this board for a project resolution for each project, but we felt that it would be best if we grouped them together, and these are the foreseeable projects at this point in time. And so with your authorization, Mike will be able to execute various documents associated, project-specific documents associated with the 4 projects. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Makes good sense, thank you. Any member of the board have questions or comments?
No questions.
Open it up to the public. Any public comment on this item?
We do have a member of the public, yes. Mr. Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. I just unmuted. Mike Garabedian, Placer County tomorrow. The 3 parts of this resolution that we would oppose individually and together are the I-80 auxiliary lanes, the Highway 65 widening, and the baseline Rego Road area. Though previously did not oppose this and actually were in favor of the auxiliary lane, that was before we learned that it would eliminate the 2-lane off-ramp on westbound 80, which we think is a significant safety hazard to make that off-ramp westbound onto Douglas, where people have to turn left to go down, go south. So we think that's a serious problem there. Widening 65 is not going to contribute to relieving long-term congestion. So we think those 3 parts of this should be removed.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Appreciate it. Any other members of the public wishing to comment? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. Mr. Lucan, I saw you shaking your head no on the notion of reducing the 2 lanes.
Maybe David could explain, that's his project, explain that a little more.
Okay, so the 2 lanes coming off, well, there's 2 lanes that feed into the off-ramp at Douglas Boulevard. And as you go up the off-ramp, you eventually get to, I think it could be 3 or 4 lanes because you have to make left turns and right turns. Okay, so the traffic volumes on coming off of 80 at that particular interchange don't warrant a 2-lane entrance onto that off-ramp. And so we looked at it under existing conditions, existing plus project conditions, as well as cumulative conditions as part of the environmental document traffic analysis. And so the traffic conditions don't warrant a 2-lane, they warrant just a single lane, and there were no safety implications associated with that particular in terms of traffic accidents at that particular location. And so in order to do the 5th lane, that for the Aux Lane project, the westbound 5th lane, we need to take that right away for the outermost lane in order to create that 5th lane. And so that's all described in the project and in the project environmental document, and it's been vetted. And these comments are new, and not that they're not unwelcome, but they're good comments. But the project has looked at the whole safety implication and traffic considerations.
Thank you, Mr. Melko. Bring it back up to the board. Any final comments or questions? If not, I'll accept a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll move approval.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sylvie?
Amara? Amara? Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Clark Kretz?
Yes.
Holmes? Howdeshelt?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Wilkins?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We move on to item L, board input on the interregional highway and intercity rail needs and potential highways to Boulevard pilot project locations for inclusion in the 2022 Regional Transportation Improvement Program. Rick, I think you've got this one.
I do. Good morning, Chair Joyner, members of the board. This item seeks any board input on 2 questions that were posed by the California Transportation Commission as part of the Regional Transportation Improvement Program. As a little bit of background, every 2 years we submit the RTIP to the CTC. The RTIP is used to program STIP funds, State Transportation Improvement Program funds, into the state program. Pctpa advanced our STIP funds a number of years ago for the Highway 65 project, and so we do not at this point get any project-related funds, but we do get operating funds, so we have to turn in the RTIP every cycle. The RTIP itself is due on December 15th, and we will be back to the board in December for adoption of that document. But because of these new requests, looking for priority responses on priorities in the region, we thought it appropriate to bring that to the board at this time so there's opportunity for input for that final document. So the two questions they proposed were asking about what the region believes are priority interregional highway and intercity rail needs. The interregional highway are limited to just certain state highways. It's not all of the state highways in the county. The other question was locations for a pilot highway to boulevards program. So as I noted, the question was asking about interregional highway and intercity rail needs. They did not provide a lot of direction on what they were really looking for. I had some discussions with CTC staff on this to kind of get some clarification. And basically they said, provide the response you think is appropriate for what your priority needs are. So with this, went back through, looked at projects that are in our regional transportation program, had discussions with our cities and counties, proposed a list of projects, took this to the TAC. The TAC concurred with the projects that are here. The text of the item has about 1.5 pages of more detailed text that provides more context with these, but from a presentation standpoint, what it's come down to is the 4 projects listed here. So reconstruction of the 8065 interchange, widening and operational improvements to State Route 65 between Galleria Boulevard and Lincoln, feasibility analysis of managed lanes on A80 from the Western County line to State Route 65, and improvements to State Route 89 and 267 in support of transit services in the Resort Triangle. My intent is I've got 2 more slides, go through that, and then come back for discussion. In regards to intercity rail needs, the identified priorities are the 3rd track expansion from Roseville to Sacramento, and feasibility studies for expanded rail service up to Tahoe, Reno, and Sparks. And in regards to the locations for a Highway to Boulevards pilot program. So again, this is something new. I consulted with both CTC and Caltrans staff to try to get more information on what this program may entail. They did not have much more information than I had. We believe this comes out of the recently adopted, what the state refers to as CAPTI, which is their Climate Action Plan for Infrastructure. That document basically recommends exploring a Highway to Boulevards program. The discussion included in that document talks about how highways can divide neighborhoods. That document talks about identifying freeways that could be converted to arterial roads, doing things like freeing up right-of-way for affordable housing. We don't think there's any freeways in the county that should be converted to arterial roads. They also discussed urbanized highways and how those can be barriers to multimodal travel. And in looking at that and opportunities, what was identified was Highway 49 through Auburn. We have discontinuous bicycle lanes and pedestrian facilities. We do have the Highway 49 project, but that does not complete the whole network, and it is not the entire length. So we're proposing is to sort of note completion of the work there between Lincoln Way and Dry Creek. The other item that came up in discussions with the cities and the counties, there are a number of locations where we're looking to do pedestrian and bicycle overcrossings over the freeways, and the freeways is a barrier to those travel. in discussions with CTC and Caltrans staff, they weren't sure that that's really what the CAPTI document was looking for, but suggested if that is important to us that we include that, and perhaps that's something, if they hear from a number of agencies, that they would consider. So here is a list of locations that were identified: I-80 near Kirby, I-80 near Rockland Road and Sierra College, and then crossings of State Route 65 at Blue Oaks and Galleria. And with that, I'm happy to go back to any slides and discuss any additions or reductions or anything in general on these.
All right, thank you, Rick. I'm going to move you back to your first set. There you go. So I think we all know what we're talking about when we're speaking of managed lanes, but I'm not sure the public understands the broad possibility within that, including toll roads, quite frankly.
It does include that. The managed lanes, kind of the sphere of that, is everything from HOV lanes, toll lanes, combining HOV and toll options. Really within that spectrum are also things like bus-only lanes. There is a kind of a wide category that is captured there.
I just wanted to bring that up because personally I think that the toll roads are going to be rather unpopular in Placer County as we move forward. So a feasibility study is probably useful as long as it has the opportunity for the public to speak up and express their pleasure or displeasure with the concept. So any questions or comments from the board? Mr. Holmes.
Yeah, two questions. First of all, I'm glad that Highway 49 is going to see some more pedestrian and bicycle access. As far as the overcrossings, it's a stretch, but I'd like to see one on Highway 49. All the workforce lives on the west side of the highway, but most of the services are on the east side of Highway 49, the Targets, the Safeways. And living out there, I see young families with children crossing 49 to go to the grocery store. And so it's a pipe dream, but I'd really like to see that looked at, if that's feasible at all.
I don't see a reason we cannot add that to the list.
Okay.
If you have a specific location now, I'd be happy to take that. Otherwise, I can follow up with you.
Well, it would be to the north of Bell Road on Highway 49.
Thank you.
And it's right across from Target.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I join Supervisor Holmes in applauding you for being innovative with some of these multimodals, especially the pedestrian and bicycle crossings of 80 and 65. So that's really very, very valuable.
Thank you.
Looking out into cyberspace, Board Member Amara.
Thank you. Sandy Amara, Auburn City Council. I find that this is just an excellent report. Thank you, Mr. Carter. And I'm very supportive of what Supervisor Holmes said, the overcrossing. And I actually think, one, I know it's expensive, but even where Evie Kane is, where children are crossing, there's a high volume of pedestrians that also go to both shopping centers. And as far as the bike and pedestrian lane on 49, the only addition requests that I would make would be that if we are doing a bike lane, there needs to be some sort of barrier, be it barriers that are more significant, or barriers such as just what do you call those? The things that bumps that separate bicycles from the vehicles. Because right now, I think it's obviously very, very dangerous to use the bike lane as it is with the way 49 is configured. But I do support everything that you said. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other member of the board? Seeing none, I'll open it to the public. Lee?
Lee Bash. I was just wondering to add I know as part of your agreement with Sierra Club on the Highway 65, you were going to look at possible rail services to Lincoln, and I would just like to add that to the,
We can do that. We actually are in the process of doing a rail study to Lincoln right now as part of the settlement agreement with the Sierra Club. That's something that we'll be distributing out to the public here pretty soon and talking about that. The preliminary findings of that study is that for the long-term foreseeable future, that rail is not feasible to Lincoln because of the costs associated with that, and we should look at promotion of bus transit to the rail station in Roseville. Just a preview of what that study is going to say, but that study is underway right now with a consulting firm that we hired to do that.
okay. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Lee. Anyone else? I'm sorry, Sylvia, you said what? All right, Mr. Garabedian, sorry.
Mr. Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity to, in part, return to Measure M that the voters did not fail to pass back in 2016. Why isn't Placer County a self-help county? Because it fills up its priorities with junk, basically, with stuff that Cacti, Placer Parkway, the interchange 8065 is going to be consistent with Cacti. Good luck, not at all. So here we are with a number of projects that do not belong in the work plan. We've posed bad projects in the work plan before. Not only did M not fail, but the constant polling, Pctpa, that Sparta have been doing, shows that the voters still wouldn't vote for these bad projects. So they really don't belong in here. It's not just wishful thinking. It's harmful. It's harmful to the county to suggest that these are priority projects. So Placer Parkway, the interchange, the 65 widening do not belong in this. They are not going to relieve congestion. It's misleading to suggest that they will. This may be a newer I-80 auxiliary lane. Adding more lanes is something that is not going to help. It is not a safety issue that I know of on the auxiliary lane here issue. The fundamental, though, is that this is kind of it's a circumvention of the public. It's a flaunting of the public in the OWP and what they don't want to provide local funds for. And you really should not be doing this. You should think more carefully about this and narrow this down to what the real priorities are that the public wants to see. These do not belong in it. But thank you for this opportunity to raise this. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Is that it? No one else? All right, back up to the board. I don't think we're being asked to take an action.
Chair Duran, I would like to just make a clarification.
Absolutely.
Mike pointed out that I noted that our STIP funds, I stated that those are spent on the Highway 65 widening, which is incorrect. They were spent on the Lincoln bypass. Just wanted to correct that for the record.
Okay, got it. So any additional discussion among the board? Direction to staff? If not, we'll move on.
Just one additional comment, given the comments from the public. I just want to commend staff on an outstanding job looking at alternatives relative to bicycles, pedestrians. There seems to be an awful lot of emphasis placed on expanding roadways and different things, and this focuses a lot and including the fact that we have both a supervisor and a council member speaking on behalf of their constituents about the need for additional pedestrian solutions. So we are looking at this from a holistic perspective. I appreciate the creativity working with CTC, and so I want to thank you again. So just following up on my honorable member next to me here on his comments. So thank you again, staff.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. The desire to reconnect communities that may perhaps have been divided by highways or freeways often is seen in a very large-scale solution, and your thought of connecting with bicycle and pedestrian overcrossings is creative and I think a more reasonable solution for our communities, quite frankly. So well done. Anyone else?
Sorry, I believe this is an action item.
Well, we were asked to give direction. Do you need a motion?
As for direction and comment, I don't need a vote. I just needed the feedback that I've received.
All right, so you're good.
I'm good. Thank
All
you.
right, then we'll move forward. Item M, First Amendment to fiscal year 2021-22 overall work program and budget. Mr. Lucan.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board. We are at a point, an annual point with our budgetary and work plan process where we bring before you the First Amendment of our overall work plan. Today, I'd like to take the opportunity to not only explain the changes that are within the work plan, but also go through some of the challenges that Pctpa is facing, which are encompassed within the work plan. So some of the key issues facing Pctpa, as we know, we have a structural deficit in transportation funding. We do not have the matching funds for the projects that are needed to address growth and development in South Placer County and the rest of the county. We lack those matching funds, and finding that funding is the core mission of Pctpa as a funding agency and as an agency that facilitates the execution of those projects, either projects that we undertake for ourselves or projects for our member agencies. This year with the OWP, and because of the uncertainty presented by the COVID-19 pandemic and us being conservative in our approach to this, as were our member jurisdictions, we have the opportunity with what we term as, and what David explained earlier with the CTSA budget, with carryover funds from the prior fiscal year to anticipate, which were done essentially because we were under anticipated sales tax generation in the county. The good news is we were ahead of and we came in ahead of what we projected, but now we have the opportunity to pay for some one-time costs within the OWP work plan, and also store away some money for future uncertainty. We have a number of key projects that we're trying to implement in this OWP. We're trying to get our, as we discussed earlier, the auxiliary lane project ready for construction. We were very fortunate to receive some funding under SB1 to do the auxiliary lane project to address both eastbound and westbound traffic congestion, and we were able to be successful with that, with a partnership with our 14 agencies in the area along Interstate 80. And so we're getting this project ready for construction, and it presents some challenges, but it is also a key component of our work plan. We have likewise with the Highway 49 project, another project that we are implementing before we turn it over to Caltrans for construction. We have some, that is a very important project, and we've mentioned it several times in the meeting today, with providing pedestrian access along a former state, or along a state highway, but it is a large part of our work plan, managed by Aaron Hoyt as the project manager, and a very important project within our budget. We continue to be challenged with the fact of whether traffic is, what is traffic's impact on South Placer County and the rest of the county. We have a bit of an anomaly with Placer County in that our traffic levels exceed the rest of the region, and that's a sign of our robust economy, but also a challenge that we're constantly monitoring that traffic, and Aaron does a great job with our traffic model, monitoring whether that's coming back, what that means, how that impacts the work plan that we do. And then lastly, this year we unfortunately are presented with some uncertainty, and I'll talk about that later in my executive director's report. But some uncertainty presented by our RSTBG CMAQ funding process, and that's something that we're going to grapple with for the next, for at least this OWP and maybe the next OWP as well. We are updating our traffic model. This is a extremely significant project. We haven't done a major update to our traffic model in 20 years. And this is something that all of not only we use for our SPARTA fees, but we also use this our member agencies also use this and tier off this for their environmental documents. And this is going to be a big part of our OWP work plan as we implement and provide that service for SPARTA, our sister agency. As we've indicated, David and Aaron, public transit is at a crossroads. We have a microtransit RFP that is nearly ready to be put out on the street. Placer County Transit is acting, if you will, as the lead agency on that, and we're working through their procurement division right now, but we're very close to releasing that RFP. That'll be a significant endeavor for Placer County. We've seen some successes with microtransit up in Lake Tahoe and in the Tahoe Basin, and we're hoping that we can also have successes down in the southern part of the county, as has been seen in other communities like West Sacramento and Rancho Cordova and other parts of the region with microtransit. And then we have a significant role to play with SACOG's Next Gen Transit Study. That's something that's been before the SACOG board here this week. It presents an opportunity to look at transit, but it also presents a huge transit to grapple with, well, what really is our transit system, not only here in Placer County, but throughout the region. Our OWP is also challenged this year and prior fiscal years with staff turnover. As folks move on to other organizations, we've had to go through the hiring process for some key positions in our agency. We have a new deputy director, Rick Carter, next to me. We have a new fiscal administrative officer, Jody Lacoste, in the audience today, and we're about to replace a senior planner here in the next coming weeks. And so those present challenges to our work plan. Our staff have stepped up and doubled up, as David would noted. He hasn't done the CTSA budget in a few years, but he's back doing it again, and that's a measure of, that when we have turnover and changes, our staff steps up and continues to implement those projects until we can replace that position. And I would say on the staff turnover part and how that plays into the budget and the OWP, especially with the fiscal administrative officer, that's a very probably one of the most key positions in our entire agency, because it handles the dollars that we have that implement really everything that we do. And so we had an opportunity with the retirement of our former FAO, Shirley LeBlanc, but yet a challenge with Jody coming on board. The opportunity was that we, and we don't have this very often in the public sector, where we have a staff member that's able to train a new staff member coming in. And so Shirley worked very closely with Jody to pass along as much as she could the knowledge that Shirley had gained over the last 13 years. But that presented an opportunity, and a wonderful opportunity to have that training. But also there was a cost associated with that, and that cost was that we had 2 FAOs on staff at the same time, and we will through the end of November. And a cost that we recommend was worth the effort of having that training opportunity and that seamless transition. So we present to you today a balanced budget of $6,198,275. That's an increase in revenue of 17%, mainly due to the carryover funding of about $1 million. And I explain why that happened due to the conservative approach to sales tax generation with LTF. We also have an opportunity to bring some new funds into our budget with the Baseline Rago Road project, as David described earlier, and also a potential reconfiguration of Placer Parkway minor reconfiguration, those present revenue opportunities for us as well. We do have some increased costs in some of our work elements, as was mentioned. The reasons for that mentioned earlier, with the increased costs of I-80, Highway 49, staff turnover and training. But we are keeping some things the same. The funding strategy, which is, again, addresses that structural deficit in transportation, that there is no change in that particular work element, but merely a shifting of activity with the maintenance level that the board approved at the last meeting, and shifting those dollars to the spring, but there is no change in the budget for that. And then lastly, we did increase our contingency. We had, a few years ago, we had a contingency of about $730,000. We increased that last fiscal year to $830,000, and with this, we think it's prudent to increase that in this budget to $1 million approximately. And because of uncertainty, we have uncertainty presented by the RSTBG CMAQ challenge, and we think it's prudent to hold away those dollars instead of spending it all on current operating items to save those for a bit of a rainy day. That will end my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, questions or comments from the board? I see no raised hands from our...
Oh, we got one.
You've got one from the public?
Do you have one?
Okay, then I will open it up to public comment. Would I be correct in assuming it's Mr. Garabedian?
You are correct. Mr. Garabedian, you're free to speak.
Thank you. The comments I made on the last item apply equally to this item, which I actually thought the last item was the OWP. But maybe it's better to sort of define today's meeting as a Measure M circumvention convention by the Pctpa. Let's just look at one example of what keeps going wrong here when developers are accommodated. Let's look at the Sutter Medical Facility, made in an arrangement with a developer, if not the same developer, for the Sac State proposal in the middle of Placer Ranch. Sac State, 18 miles from the existing campus roughly, and the Sierra College 10 miles from the existing campus. This is a facility, once again, because a developer is winging along, and the Placer Ranch with a member, on the Sierra College trustee, working their magic to put a project in a place where it shouldn't be, if only just because of the transportation nightmare students and faculty will have getting there. So just want to reiterate the points we made before, and the points we've made before, the public has made in not passing the local funding for Placer Parkway, and the other bad projects that were on that measure that were being proposed last year in the revised budget, which added, I think the baseline, yes, was added to last year's potential budget for a new sales tax measure. So there's something really wrong here that needs correction in our transportation planning, and an effort to once again become a county that's self-help and provides its local share for what is really needed. Regret that you got to have to oppose the couple parts of this OWP again, and the new part. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Garabedian. Any other members of the public wishing to comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll close public comment. Mike, I am a little curious, and it's just my curiosity, nothing more than that, a realignment of Placer Parkway. First I've heard of it.
Yeah, so there was a section in the middle of that project that when Placer Parkway was originally approved, that alignment needed to be modified for a bridge structure that goes over that. Currently, the alignment creates, if you will, a habitat area which is too small to be a habitat area. It creates a gap between Phillips Road and where Placer Parkway would go. And really, as you know, with our habitat conservation plan, the PCCP, it's designed to have large swaths of preserved habitat, not little itty bitty things that are very difficult to manage. And so this alignment, proposed alignment change that we're working on with the city of Roseville and with the landowners and also with Placer County, if you will, would correct that situation where we would preserve a larger swath of habitat north of Placer Parkway and not have this very narrow strip that is difficult to manage.
All right, thank you. One last opportunity for questions or comments.
Well, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that South Placer is a job center, that we are attractive and to folks from around the region who count on the jobs, and we have to provide them transportation options. A large number of those include highways, but I think in our plan we're being very forward-thinking, and I recognize that representatives of other organizations would like to see things in the plan, but we really have to build a plan that is not just sustainable, but is functional. And so a young family, young parents trying to get their young family from point A to point B doesn't happen in bike lanes and on buses.
All right. Didn't sound like a motion, but,
Mr. Chair, you have
oh, I do. Trinity.
Hi, I actually wanted to echo a lot of what Director Holdeschelt was saying, and that's part of the reason why South Placer County is considered such an attractive place to live for families, is the fact that it's an attractive job center and the fact that families have the ability to have transportation where they need to go on their terms. And having transportation on your own terms is extremely important to families and marginalized people. And I think that that's something that tends to get overlooked when we focus heavily on numbers. And I just wanted to, put a motion forward, but it sounds like you already have another motion on the floor.
We have a motion, but we'll take your second.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, thank you. I do have a motion and a second. Sylvie?
Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Holmes, Howdeschelt,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes?
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. We move on to item NAB 361, Remote Teleconferencing.
Mr. Chair, this item will be presented by our legal counsel, Deanne Gillick.
Hi there, Deanne Gillick, General Counsel. It's good to be here in person at the meeting because I've been remote. So do I push the button? Got it. It's there. So just, I know you're all familiar with the AB 361 that was enacted recently, and just a general overview. Since the pandemic and consistent with the executive orders, we've been meeting remotely or a hybrid notion, where some members have been present and others have been through the remote teleconference procedure, with the public participating as well. There's a summary on the slide of just some of the Brown Act provisions that were relaxed during the pandemic to allow for this modified teleconference meetings to take place. Some of those provisions are identifying meeting locations wherever a member is located, for example, your homes, and allowing the public to access that meeting location, as well as posting an agenda at that meeting location, providing a physical location for the public to be present at, opening up this meeting and allowing the public to be present. Those are some of the provisions that were relaxed due to the pandemic. AB 361 was approved in September as an urgency measure, and the governor signed it. And to allow for those modified meeting requirements to continue, the language of AB 361 requires or allows for 3 situations. The first is that there's a state-declared emergency by the governor, consistent with our COVID emergency we're operating on. The second is that there's either local or state recommendations or requirements that promote social distancing. In many counties, the local health officers have enacted those provisions. In addition, there are Cal OSHA requirements that have recommendations regarding social distancing. There are 2 other provisions that allow for the remote meetings to occur with these relaxed standards. Is if the board itself meets during an emergency and makes determinations that meeting in person is an imminent risk to health and safety. And then C is a byproduct of that, allowing you to have the continued meetings if the local board makes those determinations. As I indicated, the governor's proclamation satisfies the requirement to allow for these remote meetings to take place. And then I also put up the state regulations that recommend social distancing and recognize the COVID-19 recommendations. In addition to what we've been operating under the executive orders, AB 361 has some additional public comment requirements, which are summarized in this slide. The public comments must be allowed during the meetings. Sometimes during the pandemic, some of the public comments were cut off, so that it was only before the meeting the comments could be provided, but not live time. The AB 361 requires live time in meeting comments during the meeting. And then we have to clearly advertise how that can occur. And if for some reason the broadcast is interrupted, the legislative body has to pause and wait to take further action until that broadcast can be reinstated. Okay. An additional provision of AB 361 is requiring the local legislative bodies to make 30-day reoccurring findings that the conditions continue and that the board wants to continue to meet using these relaxed remote requirements. For city councils and board of supervisors, this is an easy exercise because they meet weekly or biweekly. It's harder for organizations like us because we meet monthly or even less often than monthly. The recommendations, the statute isn't clear. There's ambiguity on if you have to have special meetings within the 30 days to renew your findings. I know we discussed this at the last meeting, and since that time there was kind of interpretation of the vague statute that allowed us to meet clearly initially for the first time remotely. There's still some ambiguity on the 30-day renewal. The way that many local orders have stated that the teleconference meetings are encouraged and can continue until circumstances change. Our recommendation is that the board set a policy direction on whether or not you want to allow the relaxed teleconference meetings to occur, giving staff that direction to proceed with allowing for remote teleconference meetings to occur, and for staff to pay attention and monitor the situation. If there was a miracle and COVID went away tomorrow, we wouldn't need to be to entertain and consider a remote meeting next week or next month, and for staff to monitor that. And then this can be handled such that the first action item at your next meeting reaffirms, yes, we want to meet remotely and we will hold this meeting remotely. There is the possibility that you won't make that reaffirm that finding, and the meeting wouldn't occur remotely. But assuming the facts support it and the circumstances are there, that's how our recommendation is. Not to hold a special meeting in 30 days, but given the spirit and interpretation of that statute, to allow it to be 45 days, which is going to be your December meeting, which is more than 30 days away, but not to have a special meeting, to make those findings at the beginning of the December meeting, assuming that you have some remote teleconference. So with that, I went through the summary of the statute, what provisions of the Brown Act are being relaxed, the governor's proclamation, and the state guidelines that allow you to make this finding A, and it's just because of those facts you can meet remotely. And then in the future, we're going to be making those continued findings in this provision of 54953. So some technical requirements, some practical requirements, and I'm here to answer questions and respond. The staff's recommendations are to continue to allow for the hybrid meeting setup. So some members are present, some members are not present and participating remotely, allowing for social distancing in this room, allowing for those members to be participating remotely without posting the agenda at their home locations, and allowing the public to be present at the home locations, which is allowed under AB 361 with the modified meeting requirements. Okay, so answer questions. I'm available.
All right, questions from the board?
Yeah, thank you, Deanne. So the current hybrid meeting, if we were to make these findings, we could continue with this current hybrid format under this legislation.
Yeah, so for today's meeting, the findings are met. We have a state emergency, we have recommendations. It's the continuation that requires the findings for you to continue to hold those relaxed teleconference rules.
Right. So I know some public agencies have difficulty putting these hybrid meeting formats together. You know, my compliments to the Pctpa and Placer County folks for having figured it out to be able to pull it off. I personally think continuing to allow this hybrid format is a good thing, and maybe for a different reason. You know, it used to be a couple of years ago, if you felt like you had some cold symptoms, you buckled up and you went to work. Today, that's a big no-no. Any one of us, any member of the public, a day or two before a board meeting could start to have some kind of symptom, where our plan would normally, in the old days, you come in and you go to the board meeting. Now we don't want to encourage people to do that. We want to give them flexibility to continue to participate, but maybe, you know, being able to do it remotely. And from my perspective, that is a good enough reason to continue this flexibility, because it allows, you know, the public to still be able to participate remotely or in person. It allows us to participate remotely or in person, and reduces the likelihood that one of us is just going to, you know, push through and hide some cold symptoms, or which could turn out to be COVID symptoms, and create issues for others. So that's my thought on it.
All right, Mr. Holmes, no thoughts? All right.
Yeah, I have a number.
Go ahead, Bruce.
So prior to the state of emergency, how would someone who couldn't attend in person participate in the meeting?
Yeah, so there are traditional teleconference provisions in the Brown Act, which would require, if you're going to be not in the board chambers today, and you want to participate in the board remotely, to identify that meeting location, have that meeting location posted on the agenda, have the location posted with the agenda, and allow the public to be present. I know we've all heard stories about being in hotel rooms in New York or conferences in DC, including that location on the agenda location, posting it, and that. And there is a requirement that a quorum of the board members be physically present in the jurisdiction. So that is allowed. That is an option. That procedure remains. What AB 361 provisions does was it allows some flexibility so that you don't have to know where you're physically going to be before the meeting. You don't have to list it on the agenda, post it, and allow the public to be present at the meeting location.
And in my reading of the analysis of AB 361, that's why the American Civil Liberties Union opposed AB 361, and others opposed it because it relaxed those notification provisions. Is that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with, those agencies and their opposition, but it is relaxing the requirements and the notice and identifying that. There is a requirement that the agenda is very clear to provide the public access and information, and there is stepped up public participation requirements that requires us to allow for remote teleconference comments during the meeting and to pause the meeting. So there is some kind of beefed up public participation processes, but it does relax the traditional notice.
And the reason why I asked my first question is because is AB 361 for the health and safety of the agency members? Is that the focus of it?
I think there's one component with the recommendations so that the physical distancing of us in the room and those participating, as well as the public or someone else that wants to come. So I think that is a component. I haven't analyzed all of the history.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
So I think the overall difference, Bruce, and I have participated remotely in the past and had to go through this entire process of posting it and all of that. The public didn't have the ability to participate remotely at those meetings. The technology has been worked out now where the public can absolutely participate on every level remotely. And so the need to come into a hotel room or or your home because you're communicating or participating in that meeting remotely through that system has virtually gone away. And quite frankly, I think you'll all agree with this. I think the increased access to the public of this hybrid system is a really good thing, and I would hope to see it in some form continue from here on out. So.
And I understand. I have this discussion at home actually. With me taking the opposite side of what my wife states, which is.
Well, that's never a good idea.
That's never a good idea. Right. Here's my question though. Under 361, does the public comment portion of 361 remain as it does if it were in person? So you have either 3 minutes or 5 minutes to make your public comment on the agenda item.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it, or because there has been discussion about this leaving it open for 25-minute window, right?
So AB 361 specifically says the other provisions of the Brown Act still apply. Okay, so the other provisions of the Brown Act require public comment, but allows the agency to place reasonable limitations and parameters on providing public comment. So are the agency's rules and reasonable procedures and process on providing public comment can still apply, or do still apply. Time limits, limiting the subject matter, all of those traditional public comment rules apply to both the hybrid meeting, the teleconference, remote comments, or being physically here in the chambers. So if that responds.
It did,
Yeah.
and I just want to make a comment, not ask a question. But the public, regardless of whether it's this special district, a county, or city, has the ability to make public comment and provide public comment in a variety of forms, whether they're emails, which we heard about earlier, whether it's at the coffee shop or somebody says, hey, can I get a bike rack in front of the coffee shop? We are public officials. We're out and we receive a lot of public comment. So a physical meeting, or a specific date and time of a meeting is not the only time in which public comment is provided.
No, we've all been to the grocery store and taken 2 hours to get through a couple of aisles. All right, so is it the desire of this board to move forward with the hybrid meetings? I think that was your first question.
Yes, and if it is, we have a recommendation to set that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Chair, I move staff recommendation.
In its entirety?
Yes.
Okay,
Good,
good,
second.
good.
We
believe-
do need public comment on this item as well,
All right,
before we
we'll
take a
open it
vote.
up. I believe staff's recommendation also included that staff, quote, pay attention. So that was an interesting,
Yeah, and that was if there's a miracle tomorrow, and there's no need to have a hybrid meeting, then the December meeting would be traditional and.
so you are comfortable with the 45 days passing and simply taking that action at the opening of that meeting with the possibility that if the board no longer wishes to move forward, that meeting would
Stop.
would be carried out publicly only, or it would end at that point?
It depends how it's noticed. If it's noticed as a hybrid, it should end because it's noticed as a hybrid. So there is that risk. Across the state, we've all been dealing with this, and this has evolved over the last, 28 days. But that is the approach that, many, and it seems reasonable to be taking, rather than holding those special meetings.
All right, got it.
Right.
Trinity, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand raised there. Did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Oh, you know what? I think that my comments have been very well captured by the board. Essentially, I just wanted to say how significant the hybrid model is for me at the moment. Again, especially since I have a newborn, my prerogative isn't to come in and potentially bring home something to my child. And, I obviously am in a position to where bringing the public into my home would be an even worse situation. So, I think that this is definitely something that has created a lot more opportunity for people that have otherwise been unable to participate in meetings in the past, whether it's the public or board members. And this has made it so that I haven't had to step off of the board and hand my position over to my backup. So I'm definitely in favor of moving forward with the hybrid model and keeping it in place as long as we can, and potentially seeing some version of this move forward to a permanent fixation in the future.
All right, thank you, Trinity.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. Does this resolution make a health and safety finding?
No. The way this resolution is set up for Placer County, there's a variety of ways how you could have come to it. The Section A of Section E1 provides that you can meet remotely if, one, there's a state proclamation, and two, there's local or state recommendations to promote social distancing. The Cal OES regulations for employees promotes social distancing, and in some situations regulates social distancing for close contacts. So your board is not making any finding regarding any health risks. It is being based upon those two requirements, which is being met.
All right, you bet. I'll go ahead and open it up to the public now. Anyone wishing to comment on this item? I see no one in the room. Anyone on the phone lines or? All right, we'll close public comment. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Yes, I'll second the motion.
I have a motion and a second. Sylvie, please.
Amara,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Clark Kretz,
Yes.
Holmes, Howdeshelt,
Abstain.
Joyner,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Wilkins.
Yes.
Motion passes with one abstention.
All right, thank you all. We'll move on to Executive Director's report.
In light of the fact that we're running short on time and we have a Sparta meeting to attend to, I'll keep my comments brief today. Just a couple things to mention, and that is some of the planning grant applications that we're going to be submitting here, or have been submitted or are going to be submitted today around the county. We indicated that we are submitting a Sustainable Partnerships Grant application to the state today to study the expansion of rail to the Tahoe area and onto Reno. So we'll be submitting that to Caltrans. It's a partnership of many agencies in Northern California, including CCJPA, the Northern California Mega Region MPOs, which are not only SACOG, but also Bay Area MTC and San Joaquin COG, very significant support from them, as well as those up in the Tahoe region and the Washoe County Regional Transportation Agency as well. So significant project. Secondly, PCTPA, Roseville, and Rockland are going to submit an application to study those overcrossings that we talked about in the meeting today, those ped overcrossings on I-80 and SR-65. And then lastly, and I think David alluded to this, the City of Roseville is going to be submitting with our support a planning grant application for a comprehensive operational analysis to take a look at potentially overhauling the Roseville transit system in response to ongoing trends of ridership and also due to COVID-19 pandemic implications. So 3 very significant applications being submitted from Placer that we're working with, either we're working on directly or our member jurisdictions are working on. In terms of the funding strategy, upcoming items, we do have a poll coming up here. As you know, it was delayed slightly with the variant impacts, and so that poll is being will be done on starting on the week of November 30th. That will require our polling subcommittee to meet on 8th, and then to go over questions and format. And then the subcommittee would go over the results on December 17th, and then that would be brought back to the board in January. And those meeting requests have already been confirmed for that subcommittee. The last item, and probably biggest item I wanted to give an update on, is the FS-TIP, CMAQ, and RSTBG issue. As we've alluded to in the meeting today, that is something that could have a very significant impact on the core of PCTPA and why it was created in the first place almost 30 years ago, to manage our own federal dollars in the manner that we see most appropriate. If you will, Rick is our project manager for that effort. And we have been meeting with our MPO partners, not only here in the region, but also around the state over the last few weeks. We have a very significant statewide meeting coming up next week, which Rick and I are going to attend. And then lastly, at the state's encouragement, RTPAs like PCTPA and other MPOs are going to be submitting a request for a time extension to consider this. This is something that would have had to been, a plan would have had to been developed by February of 2022, with execution on the federal fiscal calendar in October of 2022. That has the potential to interrupt our upcoming spring funding round, as well as many other agencies' funding processes, which are already underway. And so we and our partners, our other like agencies, have felt it prudent to submit that request. And we're hopeful that the state is also going to submit a request for a 1-year extension to consider this issue. Rick and Director Broadway did meet with Congressman McClintock in LaMalfa's office back in D.C. Last week as part of the PBA trip, and they are poised and ready to help if we request. I would just say that the extension, if you will, does not solve the problem, but it does give us time also to work on a potential solution, as well as not interrupt existing funding processes. So as I stated at the last meeting, we'll keep this on the executive director's report for regular updates. And I'd be happy to answer any questions on my executive director's report that I went over today.
All right, questions from Mr. Lucan? I see none. I don't believe we need to open this up to public comment. So we'll move on to board member reports. Any board member reports or direction to staff? Seeing none, we move on to item Q, information items. You've got a myriad of them listed on your agenda. Peruse those in your own time. And our next scheduled meeting is December 1st. We will have no meeting in November. So if there is nothing else, we stand adjourned.